Hello, knitters. In this segment, we're going to be looking at small circumference knitting. So I am knitting the top of my hat, and I've been decreasing to shape that top. And I've come to the point where I have so few stitches on my needles. Look how they're spread out. This is going to start affecting my gauge because I am stretching these stitches while they're on my circular needle. So I don't have enough stitches to go all the way around and cover the total length of my circular needle. So I need to change the technique that I'm using to continue and finish the top of my hat. I still have a lot of decreasing to go. I need to get down from maybe 40 stitches or so that I have here to 16. There's no way I can do that on this needle without changing my technique. So there are 3 different ways that we can continue to knit this hat as the number of stitches continues to decrease. We're going to discuss those 3 different techniques. So the first way of knitting small circumference is to use double pointed needles. This is really the traditional way that knitters have used to knit in a really small circumference. Needles, double pointed needles come in sets, either of 4 or 5. I think most recently they come in sets of 5 so that you have your stitches on 4 of the needles and you use your empty needle to knit the next section. And to do that, this is the last group of stitches that I've knit. See the yarns coming out of the back of this last stitch. And I am going to knit the stitches here. So I am going to take my empty needle and I am just going to knit the stitches on this needle. So I'm coming to the last stitch on my left needle. So now I have no stitches on this needle. This is the one that I'll use to knit for the next section. I'll move my work to the next set of stitches on the next needle and continue working in the round. So using this technique, you can really knit a very small circumference. It's pretty flexible that way. You can continue to decrease if you need to. So this is knitting small circumference on double pointed needles. Another way of knitting in a small circumference is something called a magic loop. And to knit this, you need 1 long cable needle. So depending on what you're knitting, you probably need a cable needle with a length of about 30 inches at the minimum. Then you need a needle that long so that you can create this loop on one side. So I've got a loop on one side and I have my needle tips on the other side. And by doing that and creating this loop, I can take my knitting that's in the round and lay it flat. That way I can knit one side of my work and then change things around and knit the other side. So I'm really knitting two flat pieces. The reason I can make it this flat is because I've got this really long, flexible cable that's allowing me to fold my knitting in half. So in order to knit like this, we first have to move our stitches onto the needle tip. So I'm going to move the stitches that I want to knit onto this needle tip. On the other side, now I need to be able to get my tips close to each other so I can knit. I can't do it this way, but I've got that nice flexible cable. So if I pull out a length of cable on this side, I still have enough cable on the other side to make a loop. But now I have enough flexibility because of that cable on my tip side that I can bring my two needle tips together and knit. So I'm going to knit all the stitches that are on this needle tip. When I get to the end of the stitches on this needle, I'm going to have to do some adjusting. So I've knit all the stitches on this needle, have no more stitches. I need to knit the ones here, but how do I get there? So I have to start to rearrange things. So let me turn my work. The stitches I want to knit are here. Yarn is coming out of the last stitch that I knit, which is in the back now because I flipped my work over, and I need to knit these. So in order to knit them, I need to move my needle into position so I can knit these stitches. Now I can't move this side. So in order to use the back needle so I can actually do the knitting, I'm going to pull this out and create a loop on this side. I still have a loop on this side. So now I can knit the stitches on this needle. So I'm going to knit to the end of here, and then I'll have to do that same adjustment. So I'm coming to the end of the stitches on this side of my work. I want to knit these stitches now. I'm going to turn my work over. I'm going to move this needle into position so I can knit those stitches. I need to be able to use my back needle. I'm going to pull that needle out so I have enough cable so that I can bring my needle tips together to knit this needle. I still have a loop on the other side. Got two loops here, one on each side, and I can continue knitting along this section. So this is how you knit magic loop. The third way of knitting in a small circumference is using two circular needles. So what I have here are two two sets of circular needles. And just to show you the difference between the two, one of them is wood with a black cable. One of them is metal with a red cable. So I'm going to be using only one circular needle at a time and using the tips of both sides of one of the cable needles. So I recommend, if you want to do it this way and you're building your needle collection, to not have two identical needles. The cable length doesn't really matter. So you could have one needle that has a 24-inch cable and one needle that has a 16-inch needle, and be able to use one of each when you knit in a small circumference using two circular needles. That way you're not duplicating the needles in your collection, and so for further use, you don't have two of the same. You have one that's 16 and one that's 24, or one that's 24 and one that's 28. Just gets to be more useful in the future when you want to use those needles separately. So here's my knitting in the round. I have approximately half the stitches on one side, on one needle, and half the stitches on the other side. And just like working with magic loop, because I have two cable needles, I can knit one side flat and then knit the other side flat. I can fold my work in half, knit one side, and then knit the other side. So I'm going to start, my yarn is in the back. This is the last stitch that I knit, so I'm going to knit the stitches on this needle. So this is my metal needle with a red cable. I'm going to put these stitches into position so that I can knit them. I'm going to knit them with the other end of this cable needle. So here's the tip of the same needle. The other needle that's holding my back stitches is just holding them. I'm not using this needle at all right now. I'm just using both tips of the needle with a red cable. So I'm going to knit these stitches using both ends of the cable. Let me show you this way so that you can see. I have both ends of the same circular needle that I'm going to work with. This back needle, the wooden one, is just hanging out here. It's not doing anything except holding the stitches on the back needle. So I'm going to knit all the stitches on this front needle. Then again, both tips are the same because I'm using both tips of my front needle, and that needle is metal. So I've knit all the stitches on this front needle, and the stitches are still staying on this red cable. I've knit them all, so I'm done with the side. I'm going to flip it over, and now I'm going to knit the stitches on this black cable needle. This is the needle that's got wooden tips. So I'm going to get these stitches into position. I'm going to use the other end of this cable needle, which is the back one, 2 wooden tips, and I am going to knit the stitches on this circular needle. So now I've knit all the stitches on this cable needle. I'm going to turn my work again because I really am knitting 2 halves flat, and start knitting the front stitches now. Those stitches are on the red cable, so I'm going to move those stitches onto my needle, use the other end of my circular needle and knit this side. And I can just go back and forth, knitting one side and the other side. The key to knitting this way, though, with 2 circular needles, is to make sure that you're only using one circular needle to knit with at a time.